While the entire world was locked onto the Strait of Hormuz, watching Brent crude spike past $120 a barrel and waiting to see whether the US-Iran conflict would unravel global energy markets entirely, Ukraine quietly sent drones more than 1,000 kilometers into Russia and set fire to the country's biggest oil export hub on the Baltic Sea. Not near the border, not in the usual strike envelope. The Transneft terminal at Primorsk, Russia's largest oil loading port on the Baltic, the endpoint of the entire Baltic pipeline system, burning. And then, the same week, Ukraine hit the Bashneft Ufan-Eftekhim refinery in Ufa, deep inside Bashkortostan, roughly 1,400 kilometers from Ukraine's nearest border point. More fires, more industrial smoke rolling into the night sky. The timing was not a coincidence, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why it wasn't. Because this is not just a story about hitting oil infrastructure. It is a story about attention, opportunity, and what Ukraine is quietly building while the global camera points somewhere else. On the night of March 22nd to 23rd, Ukraine's General Staff confirmed that the Transneft Port Primorsk oil terminal in Leningrad Oblast was struck by Ukrainian defense forces. The attack was carried out by the Security Services Alpha Special Operations Center as part of a 249 drone overnight operation across Russia. Both the tank farm and oil loading infrastructure were hit. At least 4 tanks were simultaneously on fire, according to satellite imagery cited by Radio Free Europe. Leningrad Oblast Governor Alexander Drozdenko confirmed the strike and said personnel had been evacuated, while claiming more than 70 drones were intercepted over the region. Oil loading operations at Primorsk were suspended and had not resumed as of noon the following day, a shutdown of at least 36 hours, according to shipping data seen by Bloomberg. Now, why does Primorsk specifically matter? Because this is not just any port. In 2025, more than 46.6 million tons of oil passed through it. It can export over 1 million barrels of crude per day. It is the primary loading hub for Russia's shadow fleet, the aging tankers Russia has used since 2022 to route oil around Western sanctions and price caps. When Primorsk goes offline, a significant chunk of Russian export revenue goes with it. The same night, Ukraine also struck the Bashneft Ufan-Eftekhim refinery in Ufa. Ukraine's General Staff described it as a key fuel supply facility for the Russian military, with a primary refining capacity of around 6 to 8 million tons per year. A fire was confirmed at the site. Then, 2 days later, Ukraine came back. On the night of March 25th, drones hit Novatek's fractionation and transshipment complex at Ust-Luga, Russia's other major Baltic oil export port, located about 80 kilometers south of Primorsk, with a capacity of nearly 7 million tons per year. Russia's defense ministry reported 389 Ukrainian drones intercepted overnight, the highest single-night interception total since March 2025. Both of Russia's largest Baltic petroleum export outlets were simultaneously offline. In the middle of the worst global energy crisis since the 1970s, you genuinely could not script this more effectively if you tried. Let's address the elephant in the room, or more accurately, the elephant 2,500 kilometers southeast of the room. On February 28, 2026, US and Israeli forces launched strikes against Iran. Iran's response was to close the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's seaborne oil supply normally flows. By March 4th, the IRGC formally declared the strait closed to Western-aligned vessels. Brent crude passed $100 a barrel on March 8th for the first time in 4 years and peaked above $126. The IEA called it the greatest global energy security challenge in history. Every financial desk, every intelligence analyst, every cable news producer on the planet pivoted south. Iran, Hormuz, oil prices. Will the strait reopen? Is this the 1970s again? And Ukraine, which has been fighting a grinding, attritional, exhausting war for over 4 years, looked at that situation and made a calculation. When global attention is consumed by one energy crisis, who is watching the Baltic? When every radar plot and satellite pass is focused on the Persian Gulf, how much spare capacity does the Kremlin have to defend its rear? When oil markets are already screaming, what happens if Russia's own export infrastructure starts burning? Ukraine answered all three questions simultaneously with a single strike package. This is not speculation. Both Primorsk and Ust-Luga were simultaneously offline at the same moment the Hormuz crisis was stranding tankers in the Gulf of Oman. The global oil supply system, already under maximum stress, absorbed two more hits from a completely different direction. The Primorsk strike also came alongside confirmed attacks on the Bashneft Ufan Eftekim refinery in Ufa, drone strikes on an oil terminal in the Krasnodar region near the port of Taman, and a fire still burning at a Saratov refinery hit days earlier. Ukraine wasn't executing a single dramatic raid. It was running a coordinated campaign against multiple nodes of Russia's energy export system across thousands of kilometers. Time to land while the world was too distracted to give it the attention it deserved. It is worth pausing on this distinction because it matters more than most coverage acknowledges. Primorsk is about choke points. It sits at the end of the Baltic pipeline system, the pipeline through which Urals crude travels west before loading onto tankers. Hit Primorsk's loading infrastructure, and you do not just damage one facility, you back up the entire flow behind it. Pipelines don't have a pause button. Rail unloading becomes a bottleneck. Tankers wait. Traders scramble. The ongoing Ukrainian drone attacks on Russia's energy infrastructure have reduced fuel exports to their lowest levels since the invasion of Ukraine. That is the cascading effect in practice. A strike on one terminal travels backward through the chain like a wave hitting a wall. Ufa is about something different entirely. It is about reach and the psychology of sanctuary. Ufa is in Bashkortostan, deep in Russia's interior. It is the kind of place where the war is supposed to be something you read about, not something that happens outside your window. The Kremlin has carefully managed the domestic narrative of this war for over 4 years. The front is far away, the rear is safe. The war is being fought by someone else, somewhere else. When a Ukrainian drone reaches a refinery in Ufa at 1,400 kilometers from the border, that narrative gets significantly harder to maintain. The Kremlin can explain away a hit in Belgorod as border friction. It can frame Kursk as spillover. Ufa is industrial Russia telling its workers that the war zone has arrived. No memo required, just the fire. Here is a number worth sitting with. On the night of March 25th, Russia claims it intercepted 389 Ukrainian drones, the highest single night total in over a year. Sounds like a Russian success, right? Except it is not, really. Think about what 389 interceptions in one night actually means for the people running Russia's air defense network. Radar crews pulled from other duties. Expensive interceptor missiles fired at cheap drones. Command networks saturated. Personnel exhausted by morning. And that is just one night's worth of attention in one sector, the Baltic Northwest. Ukraine was simultaneously hitting targets in Leningrad Oblast, Bashkortostan, Krasnodar, and Saratov. Russia must protect Moscow. It must cover strategic aviation bases. It must defend ammunition depots, refineries, ports, the front line, and now a growing list of targets across enormous distances. Air defense sounds glamorous until you remember the mathematics. You cannot be strong everywhere at once. Dense coverage in one sector means thinner coverage in another. And once attackers can probe for seams across a large enough geography, they do not even need a high hit rate. They just need enough to get through to prove the shield is not complete. Every alert burns money, readiness, and attention, even when the drone is intercepted. The port of Primorsk, which can export more than 1 million barrels of oil per day, caught fire after the attack, despite more than 70 drones being intercepted over the region. Interception and damage are not mutually exclusive. Some get through. Some nights, enough get through to set 4 tanks on fire simultaneously. Ukraine is not trying to destroy Russia's air defense network. It is trying to make Russia defend a continent. That is a miserable assignment, even for a military that has more interceptors than most. Miserable and expensive. This is the part that casual observers miss, and it matters enormously. On March 23rd, the same day Ukraine confirmed the Primorsk strike, Ukraine's general staff reported 134 combat engagements along the front line over the previous 24 hours. Russian losses for the same period: 970 personnel, plus 24 artillery systems and nearly 2,000 UAVs. ISW assessed that Russian forces had launched their spring-summer 2026 offensive around March 17th, with over 6,090 Russian soldiers killed or wounded in just 4 days of intensified assaults from March 17th to 20th. Ukrainian commander Syrsky noted the Russian military command had deployed tens of thousands of troops into high-attrition infantry-led assaults, a grinding, bloody approach designed to trade bodies for meters. These are not the numbers of a conflict winding down. They are not the numbers of two parties about to shake hands and go home. This is a war still chewing through men, shells, drones, vehicles, nerves, and time at an industrial scale. And Ukraine is doing both things simultaneously, holding a grinding attritional front line while running a long-range strike campaign into the Russian economic rear. That is harder than it sounds. It requires production capacity, intelligence, navigation infrastructure, strike planning, and a willingness to spend valuable long-range assets on targets that do not immediately change the map. Ukraine is choosing to fight Russia as a battlefield army and as a military-industrial complex at the same time, across thousands of kilometers. That is a serious strategic decision, and one that has been building for over 2 years of iterative drone development and target selection. Let's be precise about this, because overstating the case helps no one. Russia has redundancy, it has repair capacity, it has a grim institutional tolerance for disruption. Transneft was already working to reroute oil volumes after the Baltic strikes. Ust-Luga resumed some operations after the drone alert was lifted. Burning storage tanks do not automatically liberate Ukrainian territory. Nobody should pretend Primorsk and Ufa signal imminent Russian collapse. They do not. But they do mean something real. Adaptation under stress, at repeated cost. Every time Ukraine forces Russia to reroute, rerouting takes time and money. Every time a terminal shuts down, revenue stops. Every time a refinery unit is damaged, fuel supply chains get tighter. And the Bashneft Ufa-Neftechim facility, remember, is specifically identified by Ukraine's general staff as a key fuel supplier for the Russian military. That is not a civilian inconvenience. That is a logistics pressure point. There is also a political economy angle here. Russia's federal budget depends heavily on oil revenue. The Kremlin continues to attempt to disguise and dismiss the economic impacts of its costly war in Ukraine, while trying to take advantage of current high energy prices. But high energy prices only help if you can actually export. If your Baltic export terminals keep catching fire, the benefit of the Hormuz price spike partially leaks away. The irony is almost elegant. A global energy crisis that should be filling Russian state coffers is being partially offset by Ukrainian drones targeting the pipes and tanks through which that revenue flows. Death by 1,000 maintenance meetings, as someone more patient than me once put it. And it is devastatingly real. There is one more layer to this, and it is the one that does not make the front page. Ukraine is simultaneously sending a message to audiences beyond Moscow. Western capitals have, over the past several weeks, been understandably consumed by the Hormuz crisis, Iran diplomacy, and the immediate chaos of Middle Eastern energy markets. The political bandwidth for Ukraine has compressed. There is a real risk that decision-makers begin to see the war in Ukraine as static, frozen, or strategically lower priority compared to a blazing crisis in the Gulf. These strikes say the opposite. They say Ukraine remains adaptive and capable of generating real economic effects inside Russia. They say support for long-range drone capability produces tangible results, not just symbolic ones. They say the war's geography is not confined to ruined villages in the Donbass. It reaches Baltic ports and Ural refineries. And they say something pointed about the nature of the conflict itself. This is not a war between two armies waiting for a mediator. It is a contest between two systems, and one of those systems is actively reaching into the other's economic bloodstream every week. Ukraine is telling Western partners, keep supporting the capability that makes this possible, because the effects are real, and the alternative, a Russia that exports oil undisturbed while grinding forward on the front line, is worse. So here is the real story, stripped down. Ukraine launched its most intense drone campaign of the year. 249 drones in one night toward Primorsk, 389 intercepted on another night toward Ust-Luga, while simultaneously fighting 134 frontline engagements in a single day, while Russia mounted its spring-summer offensive, while the global energy system was already under maximum pressure from the Hormuz closure, while the world's attention was pointed firmly south. Primorsk handles around 60 million tons of oil annually and is Russia's main oil export hub on the Baltic Sea, the endpoint of the Baltic pipeline system. It lies approximately 1,087 kilometers from Ukraine's nearest border point. Ufa is 1,400 kilometers from the border. These are not border skirmishes. This is Ukraine operating at strategic depth across multiple target sets against a country 5 times its size, simultaneously holding a front line being hammered by a full offensive. And it chose to do all of this at the precise moment global attention was somewhere else. That is not luck, that is doctrine. And it is worth paying far more attention to than it received. The front line is still a furnace, but now the furnace has very long arms. And while the world was watching the Strait of Hormuz, Ukraine just reminded Moscow, and everyone else, that distance is no longer a defense, and distraction is no longer a shield. Subscribe if you want to follow this story as it develops, because this campaign is not finished, not by a long way. For more context on how Ukraine's allies are thinking about what comes next, check out our breakdown of the coalition of the willing, including why Moldova's move this week is a bigger deal than most people realize.